Canada's premiers will meet with the Prime Minister in Huntsville, Ontario next week, where they'll talk about the government's response to the Canada-U.S. trade war. Part of that response is Mark Carney's plan to fast-track major projects, which today saw significant pushback from First Nations chiefs following a summit the Prime Minister called to reassure them.
What we see and from what we hear, this is a predetermined process. A process that is disrespectful, top-down, and divided Indigenous leaders by privileging some voices over others.
Scott Moe is the Premier of Saskatchewan, and he joins me now. Premier Moe, welcome back to the show. It's good to see you, sir.
Yeah, thank you, and good to see you, David.
I want to look ahead to the meeting next week in Ontario, but I want to start with the meeting that's happening today on the major projects and the Prime Minister's attempt to get a lot of Indigenous leaders on side. He's getting a lot of pushback today with the process, with the content of the legislation. How confident are you that you can satisfy First Nations concerns to make this bill workable?
I think we can find a path with respect to not only Bill C-5, but the broader override of the regulatory regime or process that we have in Canada, because it is in the best interest of everyone, including those in Indigenous communities. And we've seen that numerous times in Saskatchewan with various, whether they be mining proposals that are moving forward, is that they are very beneficial for all of the communities in the area where the mine site might be located, and that includes Indigenous communities. You think of the uranium mining sector with 45 to 55% employment and so on.
You got some pushback. I remember back in February, I think it was, when you said pipelines would be considered pre-approved. There's some concern that essentially what this legislation does is moves to a process like that on a national scale. So, I mean, how do you think the Prime Minister should proceed? Because there is a frustration coming out of this meeting that they just haven't done the work and people feel rushed and pressured on this one.
Well, I think a couple of things. First, Bill C-5 is a piece of legislation to essentially circumvent a number of pieces in the regulatory environment that we have today that makes projects not possible to move forward. In no way, I think, does Bill C-5 circumvent the necessity or the moral obligation that investing entities have in engaging not only with Indigenous people in the area where they are making the investment, such as a mine site, but with everyone in that area, and to ensure that their investment is inclusive of the interests of everyone in that area. We've certainly seen that time and time again in Saskatchewan. But it's always good to have the discussion about what that process looks like and such. But there has to be the opportunity for success for everyone that is coming forward with a legitimate project that is going to benefit everyone involved. And that, I think, needs to be the goal. And I hope that everyone keeps their eye on what that goal is.
So what advice would you have for the Prime Minister based on what we're seeing and hearing today on how you balance and reconcile this desire to build fast, but the desire of First Nations and the skepticism there of that their treaty rights are going to be respected and that they're going to be treated with dignity?
Well, they are, and they need to be respected. And there's a number of projects that we can point to. Most recently, we have 3 uranium mines that are coming through the regulatory process. All of them have done a very fulsome, not only duty to consult, but I would say, very inclusionary, and not just in employment, but in the way of procurement, in the way of, really instigating and allowing the opportunity for Indigenous businesses to operate in the service sector, in the mining sector here in our province of Saskatchewan. So many successes to point to. Direct ownership in some projects here as well, which are, I think, positive for everyone moving forward. We're certainly in a much better place and more work to do given, but a much better place today than we were 20 years ago when it comes to being inclusionary in all of the projects, and not to in any way circumvent the conversations that need to happen. But the bill does respect the right that we have, that everyone has, to be inclusive in the projects and the investments that are happening. And we need to ensure that that is the case in the broader form pieces of legislation and regulation moving forward too.
Okay. The last time the First Ministers got together, you hosted them in Saskatoon. Doug Ford is going to play host next week. You talked about the criteria and floated some ideas for national projects with the Prime Minister in Saskatoon. Has he given you an update on the list or what they're looking at? Do you have any more clarity on which projects are going to be moving? Because he suggested a pipeline might be one of them, but we don't know which pipeline. Do you have any greater clarity going into the meeting next week?
Well, I don't think it'd be a government that determines which pipeline would come forward. That would be the industry that would come forward. Maybe an LNG pipeline to Hudson Bay, or an oil pipeline to the Northwest Coast as well. The point being is that we have a corridor for that to happen, and that came out of the Western Premier's meeting and the First Minister's meeting was discussion around a port-to-port corridor connecting those European and Asian markets, and then industry can make the determinations on what is going to go into that particular corridor. And if it makes economic sense, they'll do it, and if it doesn't, they won't do it. And so that's exciting. When you think of the aspirations that the Prime Minister has stated with respect to Canada becoming one of the strongest economies in the G7, becoming a global energy superpower, whether it be hydroelectric power, whether it be exporting uranium from Saskatchewan for clean nuclear power, or whether it be LNG or oil and gas that we're making available to those Asian European markets in addition to the American market, that is an exciting time for us as Canadians, and us, I think, as Western Canadians, doing our level best to keep contributing to a stronger Canada. And that's why we ask for the regulatory environment to be able to do that. And that's where, in fairness, many of the frustrations have lied over the course of the last decade. And, let's hope for some better times ahead. Okay, but at this point, there's no short list. There's no parsing down that you're aware of to move to the next step, or are you just not ready to say that on national television, Premier? Yeah, I would say everything's on the list. What we need is that regulatory environment where all projects that are good, responsible, projects that are fulfilling, a duty to consult, fulfilling an appropriate environmental impact assessment, they should all be moving forward. We need that environment, that regulatory environment for that to be able to occur in order for us to attract the investment. In light of not having it, and we don't today, much due to the last 10 years of bills and legislation that have arrived, it is necessary for us to, unfortunately, pass a bill like C5, which circumvents the current environment. So we want all Saskatchewan projects to move forward. Until we're able to change the regulatory process, you're probably going to see all Saskatchewan projects that have a federal touch or responsibility being added to our list. Okay, so one of the other big topics on the agenda for next week, certainly in the conversation between premiers, not necessarily with the Prime Minister, though it is a priority of his as well, it's the push to drop interprovincial trade barriers, and you're inviting all provinces to join the new West Partnership Trade Agreement. You might have to change the name if the Atlantic provinces get in, but have any Eastern provinces expressed any interest in joining this? Because when trade ministers met in Quebec City, Premier, there was a lot of discussion about some of the complexities and the difficulties in getting rid of some regulations. What's your sense of how far you're gonna get with this? There is complexities and there is difficulties on clause by clause basis as you go through trying to make moves in removing restrictions to not only exporting products but actually allowing qualified people to have their recognition, their certifications recognized in other provinces. In the absence, because that is so difficult, maybe it's time for us just to rip the Band-Aid off. And the foremost and the most free and open trade agreement that we have in Canada is the new West Partnership. You're right, we would should all the Atlantic provinces and Quebec and Ontario sign on, we may have to consider changing the name. But it is the most free and fair and open trade agreement that we have in the nation of Canada. And maybe that's a way for us to all take a step forward together, equal grounding, equal rules for all. And let's you move into truly a non-tariff barrier in our interprovincial trade in Canada. One should think we should be able to get there. And this is a way to take a huge step. All the other MOUs and the mutual recognition are all good in their steps towards this. This would be a tremendous step forward for Canadians. But, Premier, there are language issues in Quebec. My home province, Newfoundland and Labrador, there's certain fish landing and processing requirements that would be politically and economically difficult to maybe abandon. There's timber protectionism in New Brunswick that Premier Holt says might be difficult to move away. I mean, do you really think you get to 100% free trade in Canada? Because some of these are so outsized in these local economies in their importance. And we have the same. We had the same challenges in 2010 when the U.S. partnership was first being negotiated, and those same conversations in 2017 when Manitoba came on. And so where there are challenges, there are opportunities. And I think the question is more broadly: are we fully committed to moving forward with free and open trade between the provinces, or are we only committed to saying so in words and always having to follow up with a yeah, but?
Yeah. Chrystia Freeland, the Transport Minister, also responsible for internal trade. She quotes an IMF study that talks about the value of getting rid of all of these internal trade barriers, about $200 billion to the GDP. They amount to a 7% tariff that we have there. But if you don't get rid of everything, can you truly achieve that value? And also, there's been some analysis by the Canadian Centre for Policy Alternatives that the value of this may be overstated, may be inflated, and even if it is realized, it could be over decades before you actually achieve the number that the minister has been citing.
Yeah, I would be in the value is overstated team. I just think that is an overstated value. That being said, I can only make us stronger if we can reduce interprovincial trade, regulatory barriers, trade barriers, but also labor mobility barriers, which are extremely challenging, I think, for individuals, Canadians that want to move, between provinces from time to time, or can find a better career opportunity in another area. So I do believe they're overstated, but it doesn't mean in any way that there isn't value there. And in light of very challenging international geopolitical, tariff-riddled discussion, counter-tariff riddled in other jurisdictions, as you see allies aligning and maybe not getting along from a trade perspective, that we really take care of our own house and keep our own house clean, and that includes interprovincial trade barriers. And so that's the offer that we'd put out. It is the foremost trade agreement in Canada, and to extend it to all provinces, I think would be a positive, not just for the province that I represent, but I think in the medium to long term, it'd be a real positive for all Canadians.
Right. It may not be worth $200 billion, but it doesn't mean it's not worth doing, to summarize things from your perspective. But, on that geopolitical international situation riddled with tariffs, I mean, obviously the U.S. is the biggest actor in that space right now. The Prime Minister said this week that there isn't much evidence of the United States making deals without tariffs. And a lot of people have viewed that as him, and Minister Champagne has said similar things, as sort of priming for the reality that whatever the conclusion is with this process with Donald Trump, Canada may face some level of tariff. Do you see it that way, and do you think Canada should be willing to accept that, if on balance, if it mitigates the harm? How do you see it?
I think that is the reality of the situation. And, we just spent a few minutes talking about interprovincial barriers, tariffs, also, AKA tariffs. So I think that is the Prime Minister, Minister Champagne, really identifying with what the reality of the situation is. And we live with tariffs. In years gone by, Saskatchewan very much is globally focused in the exports that we have. Our second largest export nation is China. Lots going to India and the European Union. And we have tariffs at various times of varying levels in all of those countries. And we have always been able, the last decade or so, to work our way through those on a provincial basis. And I would say it is rather refreshing to have a Prime Minister that is prioritizing international relationships and able to actually stand beside us in some of those conversations. So I think it is the reality of what things look like moving forward, but it isn't new. We've lived in a tariff-filled environment between provinces, between nations around the world, and even at times with the U.S.
Politically, though, just as a final point, Premier, we've seen the federal Conservatives have criticized Prime Minister Carney for suggesting this. I mean, is it a political failure for the Prime Minister if Canada ends up with some level of tariffs at the end of this, or is it just the reality of dealing with Donald Trump? How do you view it?
The reality of dealing not just with Donald Trump, but dealing in any international trade agreement is, there are going to be certain products that are going to be, have some type of a carve out. You saw that, right down to and including the CFTA, and the federal government has done a good job of removing the exemptions that they had in the CFTA, and those essentially were, non-tariff barriers in our own, Canadian free trade agreement. And so tariffs are part of every conversation. It's our goal, and I believe it's the Prime Minister's goal to have them at zero or pushed down as low as they can. And I would say that holds true for every country. around the world, and it only benefits us in Saskatchewan and Canada when we can achieve it. And here's hoping we do, and we'll do everything we can to support the Prime Minister in that endeavour.
Saskatchewan Premier Scott Moe, appreciate the time today, sir. Thanks so much.
Thank you so much.